All right, let's dive into a question that has sparked centuries of debate, divided entire churches, and it all hangs on just a few words from a single passage in the Bible.
So here's the big one. Are prophets a thing of the past? It sounds simple, right? But the answer is, well, it's anything but. Have the days of God speaking through prophets come to an end? Or is that still happening today? That's the mystery we're unpacking.
And believe it or not, it all comes back to this one passage from the book of Hebrews. Now, at a first glance, it just seems like a beautiful statement about Jesus' importance. But if you look a little closer, you'll see this verse is a major fork in the road, theologically speaking.
So, let's treat this whole thing like an investigation. And our first piece of evidence is this puzzling passage itself. How on earth can one little scripture lead people to two completely opposite conclusions? And that right there, that's the heart of the mystery. We're not talking about some small disagreement here. We are talking about two fundamentally different ideas about how God communicates with us, and it all traces back to how you read this one verse.
First up, let's explore one side of the argument. We'll call it the case for closure. This interpretation is really common, especially in evangelical circles. And honestly, it seems pretty straightforward at first.
So the thinking goes something like this. Jesus is the final, complete, ultimate word from God. That phrase, "in these last days," is seen as signaling the end of an era. So if the message is totally complete in Jesus and the New Testament, then, well, you don't really need prophets anymore, do you? The book, so to speak, is closed.
And that argument is clean. It's tidy. It wraps everything up with a nice little bow. But like with any good mystery, you have to ask, are we missing something? Is there another piece of evidence we haven't looked at yet?
And that question, well, it leads us straight to the other side of the coin, a totally different way of reading that exact same verse. This view doesn't see an ending at all. It sees a transition.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. The whole debate hinges on what you think the verse is emphasizing. The first view says Jesus is the last word, end of story. But the second view says, no, he's the ultimate word, the supreme authority. So in this reading, the passage isn't about God going silent. It's about a change in management. All communication, including prophecy, now flows through the authority of Christ.
And people who hold this second view will often point you to other parts of the same book, like this verse here. They ask, look, if Jesus never changes and he's leading a living, breathing church, why would he suddenly cut off a primary way God has always communicated with his people?
So now we've got two competing theories, both spinning out of the same two sentences. To figure this out, we can't just keep staring at that one clue. We need to zoom out and look at the rest of the evidence, the rest of the story in the Bible.
Our first piece of conflicting evidence actually comes from a letter written long after Jesus had ascended into heaven.
And here's why this is such a big deal. The Apostle Paul lists prophets right alongside apostles and teachers as foundational roles for the church, and even gives a timeline. He says they're needed till we all come in the unity of the faith. I mean, let's be honest, have we reached that point yet? This really suggests an ongoing need for them.
Okay, so we've seen the instruction manual, so to speak. Now let's see it in practice. In the book of Acts, we get this story about a prophet named Agabus, who is actively working in the early church.
See, this isn't some abstract theological debate anymore. This is a story from the ground, a historical account. It pretty clearly shows that the first Christians did not believe prophecy had ended. They had living, breathing prophets like Agabus giving very specific real-world predictions.
And for our last piece of biblical evidence, we're not looking at the past, we're jumping all the way to the future. Right here in the book of Revelation, it describes these two witnesses who show up and prophesy during a major end times event. This really throws a wrench in the idea that the last days mentioned back in Hebrews meant game over for prophecy forever. It actually suggests God will use prophets again in a future last days. So hold on. After looking at all of this, the question starts to shift, doesn't it? It's not just about what one verse means anymore. It's about how we figure things out and how incredibly easy it is to fall into what you might call the interpreter's trap.
And what we might be seeing here is a classic case of cherry picking. It's when you find that one perfect little verse that seems to prove your point and you hold on to it for dear life, while maybe, just maybe, ignoring all the other verses that complicate the picture. And it usually follows a simple pattern. You don't start with an open question. You start with the answer you already have. Then you work backwards to find the evidence to support it. It becomes less about discovering truth
and more about defending what you already believe.
And this is where this whole biblical mystery suddenly becomes relevant to all of us. This is a case study in critical thinking. The methods you use to read any text, whether it's a religious book, a legal contract, or a news article, are going to completely shape the answers you find.
So, after our little investigation, where does that leave us? Well, it shows us that a single piece of evidence, when you look at it in a vacuum, can be pretty misleading. To get closer to the truth, you have to take a broader, more contextual approach.
Ultimately, this entire debate reveals a deep challenge that applies to all of us, no matter what we believe. It teaches us that it's just not enough to know the words on the page.
The real skill, the thing that makes all the difference, is understanding the context, weighing all the evidence, and being honest about our own biases. The how we read is just as important, maybe even more important, than the what.
And that leaves us with one final, big question for you to think about. When we're really searching for truth, which should lead the way? Our strong, passionate convictions, or our willingness to look at the whole picture, the full context, even if, especially if, it challenges what we think we already know?